If you've been a part of gun culture for some time, the topic of stolen valor is nothing new. It comes back from time to time, every couple of years or so, when some character who turns out to not be who they claimed they were has to go through the public ringer, at least within the cycle or the circle. But now we might be encountering something like the Gelman amnesia effect, as the term stolen valor is now on headlines and it's across the country and people are talking about it. And Tim Walz is being accused of stolen valor. And so maybe we can take a minute where we can reconsider what that means and what it means to participate in stolen valor and where the double fallacy comes out to play. Now, it would be much more entertaining and much more fun if we were just going to go back and forth making or slinging word salad about who's the better candidate or whatever. But since it is in the public conversation right now, we might as well tackle some of the challenges that are being presented when somebody commits stolen valor. So let us begin. And before we do, this show is sponsored by Obsidian Arms. Now, if you have been in the gun culture for some time, again, you will recognize that Obsidian represents many of the facets of gun culture. It has the self-sufficiency in toolkits if you're looking to add that to your capabilities. They sell their own parts, as well as a firing pin that has a very interesting feature that sets it apart from others. And much for some of those of you who are business-minded, and you're interested in bringing a product to market, give them a call or get in contact with them, because if you are looking at having metal parts made at scale, they might actually have a great solution for you. You can approach them from different levels of your readiness. You can approach them from drawings to CAD designs, and they can help you out along the way. And they are the first sponsor of the show. That is, again, Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com. So, stolen valor. Generally speaking, stolen valor events take part in, well, they come in two very distinct varieties. The first one is more tragic, and the second one is more nefarious. The tragic example that we see in stolen valor oftentimes is involved with or oftentimes involves a pretty heavy case of mental illness. And we're talking about a person who typically is wearing the uniform isn't exactly fitting right. It might have the wrong eras on it, eras like coming from the different timelines, or, well, that's probably the weirdest way to say it. And you look at like the way the patches are set up, or the medals, and they'll have like every medal that ever existed from every army in every country. And so in this case, that version of stolen valor, I mean, we usually approach it with some semblance of not kid gloves, but it's a tragedy. The person who is doing the stolen valor, who is claiming to be in some sort of military capacity, is oftentimes suffering from a rather severe mental illness. And I think it's appropriate for some grace to be extended. Now, obviously, we don't want to just live with the fantasy, but so on and so forth. Now, the second case, though, which is quite more nefarious, can oftentimes come about not necessarily by accident, but by negligence. And that is, it can oftentimes happen in like a secondhand nature, where like as hard it is as it is right now to get away with a lie and having a very distinct lie about your service record, your achievements, your schools, your unit and whatever. Oftentimes it can start maybe in the second hand, in a little bit more innocent way, where two people are working together. One person mistakes that the other one is in a unit, but they weren't, and so they claim that they were, and the person who's now wearing the title doesn't really dismiss the rumor quickly enough. It's not just about speed, but let's use this as an imaginary case. So I was in Ranger Battalion, and Ranger Battalion sometimes works in conjunction with other units. Let's say the Navy SEALs. Now, the Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, different organizations, completely different structures from that capacity, still underneath the shadow or the umbrella of JSOC. But let's say you and I work together, or you and I work together, and through the grapevine or through a story or something, you come to hear that I worked on one mission with the Navy SEALs, even though I wasn't a Navy SEAL, I was an Army Ranger. And so the mistake is made where you, in public, someone says that I was actually a Navy SEAL, even though I wasn't. And I hear about it and I know about it, and I don't put it to rest. I don't make a correction in a reasonable or meaningful way. And it doesn't mean that we should be holding everybody to accountable, or everyone accountable to everybody all the time. What it means is very times it can happen, or I can see it happening in a little bit more of an innocent sense, where going back, you and I are working together in some capacity. You say to somebody else that I was actually a Navy SEAL when I was an Army Ranger. It's an innocent and honest mistake, and I hear about it, but you know what? I like the fame and the power that I'm getting from that, so I don't actually I don't be quiet about it. The reality is that would be a case of stolen valor, in the sense that I am allowing a lie to persist knowingly and deliberately in my environment, because that gives me credit for something that I didn't do. And so this is that second part, that nefarious version. And I gave probably what would be one of the more innocent versions or ways that something like this can happen, but we still, from time to time, encounter people who just flat out lie about what they did, or who they were, or what job titles they held. And some of the most entertaining and classic ones are going to be those ones that are, well, I was a insert cool guy here, and the reality is they were only ever attached to him and they never really did the job. And so, like, that's a lie, and you're in trouble. It might be one of the most specific cardinal type sins of the gun culture, is to lie about military service. And every once in a while, somebody comes out, somebody gains a bunch of fame and popularity through social media or otherwise, and after, maybe a honeymoon period of 6 to 9 months to 1 to 2 years, it turns out that their story that they wore a Green Beret turned out not to be true to begin with. And for right reason, we would want to look at that and go, shame on you. Now, a follow-on question is there a pathway to redemption? Can somebody commit one of these quote unquote sins or crimes against the community and somehow do penance, make their way back into the culture, or are they forever damned? Time will tell that question. So why are we talking about it, though? Why are we talking about stolen valor at all? Well, stolen valor, while there are very clear examples of what it would be to participate in stolen valor, again, using myself as an example, if I were to claim to be a Delta Force guy or a Green Beret, I was never those. I never worked in those positions. I never passed those selections. I never even attended those selections. But if I were to allow people, if I were to spread the lies, the rumors that I was actually a Delta Force guy, then that would be committing stolen valor. But there are smaller cases of it too, like, well, I went to combat. Does Kuwait count as a combat deployment in 2007? Kind of, not really. I don't know. I wasn't there. But this is where you can see how the truth can get stretched a little bit, and exaggerations quickly turn into lies, and lies turn into, well, stolen valor, and stolen valor turns into career-ending public PR nightmares. And so, well, at least for those of us who are not in a position where we get to fail upwards all of the time. And so stolen valor, we can investigate the idea of stolen valor a little bit by considering, what it is that what valor is there to be stolen. The gun culture and its own little microcosm of interests and trends and popularity, and you could say clout or relevance or legitimacy, does tend to revolve in, or it has its own rules. And every once in a while you see somebody who is clearly not a part of that community, this gun culture community, someone who enters in thinking that they can revolutionize everything, and only to quickly find out they don't understand how that group and this culture is actually quite different than this other culture, even though there are similarities. Enter conversations on maybe airsoft or gun video games or skateboarding and so on and so forth. Similarities, differences, we figure it out. And so the question, though, is in this idea, like, what valor is there to be stolen? Well, having some form of a military career is somewhat of a open door into the gun culture. It's not a guaranteed entry, and people can have that revoked even though there is no board and there is no committee, but you can do certain things that will sort of let your invitation be revoked. There is a bit of reputation that travels around in this culture, but also so in a sense, that by nature of having volunteered to be in the military, for some reason is still held as sort of a pass to being in the gun culture, to having maybe some relevancy, even though that might be broaching on the appeal to authority fallacy, which we'll get into in a second. And so the challenges that surround the kind of nature of what we would call stolen valor is that it's also kind of built on a bit of a fallacy. It's also built itself on this appeal to authority as well. And this is why when you see characters like Tim Walz lie about and embellish their military career to try to make a political point about gun control or his legitimacy in some sort of stressful arena, or that, whatever, he's claiming that he went on a deployment, he's claiming that he did all these things, and it's like a deployment to Italy, it doesn't count, man. It's not really a deployment, I guess, even though there's hardship. We're seeing what's happening is he's making kind of a weird double mistake. First of all, he's lying about what he did. That's a good way to get yourself at least disliked in amongst the types of people who prefer honest politicians. Enter, jokes there. But it also, to those who understand that he's also making an appeal to authority, the structure of the lie is built also on a fallacy. You're lying about your military achievements or your military credentials in order to claim an authority that doesn't exist because it is an appeal to authority fallacy. Kind of odd. And so, of course, I am talking about Stolen Valor now because of the news and the events that have been surrounding around Tim Walz. And I want to make a bit of a public, not correction, but challenge to the way that he's being dragged through the political spectrum. First of all, there's this thing, I'm seeing this conversation pop up within the gun culture, especially amongst veterans, and even more specifically in those of the special operations variety. Veterans, current active serving, and similar. And that is that we are very well aware of, and we have been very well aware of, and we've been sort of taking it as the status quo, that the divorce rate is so high amongst those people. I think I can remember. I knew people while I was in the military who were divorced before they could even legally drink. Kind of a strange thing. And you can add in some factors of hastily getting married, using the urgency of a deployment as a justification for getting married or something like that. But before we go down, one of the challenges that military members, especially in these higher tempo, higher operating arenas, face is that something has to give. They either are losing time with their family. How many birthdays do you miss from deployments? How many fathers have missed the birth of their first child because they're on deployment? How many fathers have missed their children's birthdays, their wedding anniversaries, and so on and so forth because they're deployed all the time? Or they're just constantly busy all the time. They're constantly training cycle into busy, into deployment, into training cycle, into school, and just and it drains and it costs somewhere. So there is a conversation being had. I think Nathan Spearing brought it up well on Twitter not too long ago, but it has to do with sometimes it's the right answer for men to leave the military and go home, be a father, and raise their children and be married to their wife. There are tragedies in this environment, which we've heard, and tragedies like a man he will give his entire life to the military, and his family will dutifully serve, well, not serve in the same way, but dutifully go alongside of him, only for him to die of health concerns not long after leaving the military. And so there's some tragedy there. And my condolences go out to your family. So what happens in this illustration, and why I'm bringing this up, is because one of the things that Walz is criticized for doing is dodging a deployment to Iraq by getting out of the military. And I don't think this is the best thing to throw at his feet. I really don't think it's the best one. It can be cogent and poignant if there is some maybe more direct evidence to say that he literally was making that decision because he lacks the moral fortitude or something like that. However, of all of the things that he has said and done, and all of the issues that is probably not the best one to throw at him, given there might be a little bit of spaghetti at the wall strategy, but I digress. If we're going to say at one time that it would be appropriate for a man to leave his position in the military, knowing that it's going to be replaced, the military is going to be fine. As fine as it can be in this administration, but he is going to be fine, and he's going to instead invest into his family and raise his children and be married to his wife. We can't then criticize somebody else for possibly doing the same. I mean, now there's some room for error, and I'm not going to go down that road. Rather, though, the other claims that Walz has apparently made are certainly more egregious when it comes to this realm of stolen valor. We've seen the one where he claimed to have been on a deployment so that he can immediately appeal to his own authority on weapons of war and assault weapons bans. That one is a double fallacy that we've already addressed. You didn't deploy, you're lying, and you don't have authority. Not to mention, you kind of come across as a bureaucrat. Cut that shit out. The second one, though, which is it has to do with either the bend to combat or claiming his rank that you didn't have. What you're dealing with here is you're dealing with somebody who lies about their achievements, lies about what they've done, and they're lying about you to try to fool you into thinking they have some legitimacy. Now, Walz might have maybe what we'll call legitimacy because people actually did vote for him and people actually made the decision to kill their own city. The suicide of the city of Minneapolis is all you should need to know about the leadership of one Walz. But we're talking about stolen valor still, aren't we? Does committing stolen valor invalidate you from some sort of public office? It certainly doesn't invalidate you in a legal sense, but it should make it morally dubious to consider someone a continuous candidate if they have chosen to lie about something that is so easy to document, so easy to fact check, and so easy to reference. It gives off the attitude and the perspective, it gives off the attitude and the air of a huckster who is in the form of those dirty little emails, if you remember them, that were poorly spelled and they were oftentimes full of misspelled words that were a scam. If you remember these scam emails that would be like, congratulations, you've won $1 million. All you have to do is send me your bank account information. It's like, okay, they're scamming you. And when you read the email and you're not tired, usually it's very clearly misspelled words. Well, I don't know if that's all on purpose, but it functions to filter out anyone who's smart enough to figure out that it's a scam. They're not really trying to scam middle-class, mid-intelligence people. They're trying to scam people who are dumb enough not to notice that they're dumb enough not to notice that the whole thing is misspelled anyway. Like, you're not going to be able to figure that out. So, in this sense of Tim Walz committing stolen valor and trying to convince people that he is a good candidate and he is a smart person and he knows things about guns because he was in the military once, is another example that he's appealing to a very low denominator. He's trying to appeal to people who do not have the moral framework to understand what they're talking about before making life-threatening decisions about it. So, read into that as you will. Now, what does this mean for us outside of it? I mean, well, I think it's pretty clear that most, if not anyone who's going to be a part of the gun culture is most likely not voting for Walz or Harris. I mean, this is just kind of a cultural given. The values that they stand for are antithetical to the morals that we appeal to. And so there's no real room for error in that kind of activity. It's simply, if you believe that people have the right to bear arms and they should not be tyrannized by their government, then you're pretty much barred or in order to remain consistent, voting for someone who's going to appeal to his own authority to strip you of your right to self-defense. Meanwhile, the city and the state that he resides over burns with as last I understood, 1,500 buildings were lit on fire during the Summer of Love. And if you continue in that arena now, the type of violent crime that is taking place in Minneapolis is most oftentimes being done with a Glock with the switch, which is not the, quote, weapon of war that is going to be, which is not the weapon of war that is going to be banned in this example. I mean, it's already illegal, but who cares, right? So what you have is you have a very classic case of now manipulation. Man claims that he is an authority on something, which, well, he's an appealing to authority. We've already determined that's a fallacy. And for a brief moment, I know I've mentioned the appeal to authority fallacy a number of times. I'm going to iterate why someone having authority does not make a thing true. The appeal to authority is a fallacy because by the nature of a person's position, a rank or some form of expertise does not guarantee that what they are saying is going to be true. It is not sufficient criteria for a truth-making principle that a person holds a specific position of authority. A person, being a king, cannot edict something into truth. They can only they can only create laws. So, I mean, okay, fine, you can find a verbal loophole in there if you want to play the judo. But it goes a little bit further. Why this appeal to authority is considered a fallacy is because the intelligence of a person or their authority on a subject does not, in fact, fit the criteria to make something true. It does not, in fact, bear the criteria required. That a person holding a position does not bear the truth-making criteria on which to make a thing true. Just because I was at some time an Army Ranger does not, in fact, make me right or make my statement true. It does not make a thing true. We might use it as a heuristic in the sense of kind of like a rule of thumb or like a something that we use as a general principle, but is not a universal truth. That, let's just use an example. Delta Force guys are usually pretty good at CQB. It doesn't mean that there won't be one that's bad about it, but that's an example. Or a guy, a Delta Force guy is most likely good at shooting whatever that evaluation standard might be. And so we might make that kind of assumption in the form of a heuristic, but that's not the same thing as guaranteeing that because a person holds a position, they are in fact a good shooter. So how does this then apply one layer down? We can understand that an appeal to authority can function in the sense of a heuristic, but it does not function as a truth-making principle. It's sort of trust but verify. And when you commit stolen valor, that verification goes out the window. That trust is now evaporated. The idea that we could trust a person who is claiming or who is running as a vice president who's willing to lie about something so straightforward as his military service should tell you all that you need to know about his character, even though it's sort of a banal lie. It's a boring one. It's not even the entertaining types of lies that children made where it's like the moon did it, or it's just imaginative complexities of a child's mind in that sense. But no, it's just a very banal lie. It's a very simple one. It's one that's very easy to verify. No, you didn't have that rank. No, you didn't do this. No, you're lying about who you are. You're lying about what you've done. And you're trying to appeal to people who have the ill will towards the American, or I guess towards my people in mind. They harbor ill will towards me and my well-being, and you are willing to lie and cheat and steal to do that, and that's shameful. Now, outside of the bigger politics of it, stolen valor is a challenge in the gun culture when it comes to things that are a little bit more vague. A little bit more vague in the sense of, well, if you go on a deployment that's considered a combat deployment, but you don't fire your gun, did you go on a combat deployment? Maybe. I mean, you might be a little, you're definitely stretching some things. this is where there needs to be some grace and some understanding that, as soon as we turn on the hose of Stolen Valor, then it very oftentimes turns into a conflagration. And because the phrase is trending, at least within the certain circles, it becomes a dagger that's thrown at literally all of our cultural enemies or all of our rivals or all of the people that we don't like. And then it just turns into a witch hunt, and then it falls apart very quickly. If you look at the life cycle of the witch hunts that happen within gun culture talking about Stolen Valor, usually there's a big case that kicks it off. It catches a bunch of attention really quickly, and then as a result, everyone starts looking and ferreting out for the other potential cases of Stolen Valor. Old wounds are brought up, salt has re-entered into the wound, and then now, okay, everyone is on fire, and then no one likes each other anymore. Yeah, we can probably chill out on that a little bit.